You're listening to the 95Podcast from the team at 95 Network, where we host conversations specifically designed to support leaders in small and mid-sized churches.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the 95 Podcast. This is Dale Sellers, Executive Director at 95 Network, and looking forward to the conversation we're having today with my friend Jordan Hibbard. Jordan and I got together a few weeks ago, and he and his company are actually going to help sponsor our very first Soul Care Essentials Conference that we're doing with Compassion International. They're taking care of the lunch that day, and we're really excited about that. But he also has just a fun company he works for that I think will be very beneficial to churches, to pastors, to leaders. In two ways. One, I think they can help you individually with some things, but also maybe with your church. And so we're going to find out more about that later. But first of all, hey, everybody, meet Jordan Hibbard. Jordan, how you doing today?
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much, Dale, for having me on the podcast. This is awesome. I'm really excited to hang out for a little bit and talk about what we get to do and see how we can serve the 95 Network.
Well, you know, you and I are tight, and the reason we're tight is because we had breakfast at Cracker Barrel. And in fact, you got so excited about it, you went to 2 Cracker Barrels that day. So that was, I mean, that is living the
doesn't get better than that. 2 Cracker Barrels in one day.
And so
that was fun to hang out with you and Joseph and your lovely bride.
Yeah, well, we really enjoyed meeting you and love what you do. But before we dive into all that, kind of give us a little background, tell us who you are, and tell us your story a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to. So a little bit about me. I've been in ministry for about 15 years now. And grew up actually in a ministry family. My parents were missionaries to Indonesia and the southern Philippines. And God gave me a heart for people in ministry, gave me a heart for pastors and for ministry leaders. Growing up in a ministry context with parents, and some of my best friends, their parents were in ministry as well. And so God's just given me a heart to really want to serve pastors and missionaries. And I think also through my time growing up overseas, God really gave me a heart for the world, a love for travel, a love for people and cultures that are different than me, different than where we live here in South Carolina. And so that kind of is, really my initial background as a young child, but I don't think that was an accident. I think God really was teeing me up for what I get to do and setting me up for that. And so I've just stepped into a new role. The last 13 years, I was a part of one of the best ministries in the country. I got to work for one of my best friends named Clayton King. I know Clayton's a good friend of yours as well. You've known Clayton a long, long time, and got to wear a lot of different hats at Clayton King Ministries. But one of my favorite hats is I got to oversee all of our international programs. And so I got to oversee all of our missions trips. So we sent missionaries all over the world, to India, to Guatemala, to Haiti, to Thailand. I got to work a lot just one-on-one with pastors and missionaries to plan mission trips for them. And then also got to send hundreds and hundreds of students all over the world, and really enjoyed getting to see students' eyes opened up on missions trips. And then another part of my job that I got to oversee when I was at Clayton King Ministries is I oversaw all of our study trips. So we planned study trips to the Holy Land, to Israel, to Greece, to Turkey, and then also to Egypt as well. And I had never experienced the Holy Land. I'd gotten to travel all over the world, Dale, but I'd never gotten to go to the Holy Land. And honestly, 10 years ago, if you would have told me I would have had the opportunity to make multiple trips to the Holy Land and see, where Jesus walked, I would have told you, you're crazy. Like I'm just a missionary kid who grew up in the Philippines. Like I would never have that opportunity. And so got to serve in that role with Clayton and our team at Clayton King Ministries for over 13 years. And it was, 13 of the best years of my life. I met my wife there. My 3 beautiful kids were born in that season. And some of my best friends to this day are still a part of that ministry. And so honor them and honor that ministry for the investment that they've made into my life. But about 8-9 years ago is when we began our study tours to Israel. And I had the opportunity to go research and figure out, how do you even plan a study tour to Israel or to Greece and Turkey? And, our leadership team, similar, I think, to, a lot of pastors are sitting in this role of, they would love to go to Israel, but they don't know how. How do you go to Israel? How do you even get the ball started? Where do you, start with buying airplane tickets? There's hundreds and hundreds of hotels. How do you, a lot of pastors would say, hey, I know the Bible well, but I don't know the history and the geography of, some of these specific sites. And how would I ever even get started there? And so, about 8-9 years ago, I was tasked to go research. How do you even figure that out? And so I researched a bunch of companies and ended up landing on working and partnering with a company called Wilcox Travel, and got to work with them for 8 or 9 years, and got to plan many, many study trips to the Holy Land for our team at Clayton King Ministries. And through that time, built just an amazing friendship with some of the staff at Wilcox Travel, planning just some amazing once-in-a-lifetime trips that we got to do, and invite people to have that opportunity to join us on those trips. And about a year ago was when God really started moving and stirring in my heart, and just kind of sensing in my heart, but then also in my wife's heart, that God was leading us into a new season. And long story short, I'm now working with that same company, with Wilcox Travel, and have loved it. I've been with them for several months now, and have continued some of those friendships, and have really had some amazing opportunities already in just the first couple months on the team to work with pastors and ministry leaders to plan some amazing once-in-a-lifetime trips to the Holy Land. And so that's what I do, Dale. I get to sit down, hang out, and talk with pastors, missionaries, and then also ministry leaders. And our organization, we're not just a business. We have a heart for ministries, and we really want to come alongside of missionaries, pastors, and ministry leaders, and just see how can we support the work that God's called them to do. And then specifically with study tours, like I was saying before, a lot of pastors would love to go, would love to go see the Holy Land. They've read about it for years and years and years. They teach about it every week, so they know the Bible well, but they've never had the opportunity to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I get to do, and probably my favorite part of my job, is sitting down with pastors and just saying, hey, what could a trip look like for you and your church? And, spending time dreaming about what that could look like, and then making it happen. So that's what I do. And I love it. It's a fun job. I get to travel a lot. I get to meet with a lot of different pastors, a lot of different churches, and then get to take trips to the Holy Land and assist pastors on those trips as well.
Well, you created a bunch of questions I want to ask and dive into.
Okay.
And so it's
questions are great.
Well, the first thing I want to know, I was, as you were talking, I was thinking how to format this question. Can you give us some idea of what it's like growing up in a foreign country as a missionary's kid? I don't know how to ask the question that I'm thinking, but it's like if we've not done that, we can't relate to what that's like at all. But it seems to me that most missionary families, they're very close. The families are, I don't meet very many, and I don't, I obviously don't know everybody, but I don't meet very many missionaries, kids that grew up who seem to talk negative about it. They seem to enjoy that environment, and that fascinates me. Can you kind of dive into what that was like a little bit?
I would love to. I will say, I feel like I get that question a lot.
Oh, you do? Okay.
And I think the answer is not as exciting or, robust or sexy as, I think people are expecting it would be. And I think the reason is, for me, it was just regular life.
It was life. Yeah. Okay.
It was life, and the same as someone that grows up here in South Carolina, whether they live in Greenville, Charleston, or whether they live in, the backwoods in a smaller community. If that's what you're raised in, that's what you're used to. And so I was raised in the Philippines. I think in hindsight, I'm like, wow, I had this amazing opportunity and got to travel a bunch. I got to, grow up so I actually went to an international school where I had friends from all over the world. Some of my best friends were from the Philippines, from Indonesia, but then also from Honduras, from Guatemala, from Israel, because their parents were either in business, or they were in government and politics, or they were missionaries. And so that was the environment that I was raised or schooled in, and so I think it was an amazing opportunity for God to give me, a perspective on the world and different cultures. But in the moment, I was just a kid. I was just a 7, 8, 9-year-old.
Yeah. How long were you there?
I was there for about 10, 11 years. Mm-hmm. And so, for me, it was just, I thought growing up in the jungle, I thought, tubing down rivers, getting to go, on boats and, exploring the jungles and get muddy and dirty. I thought that was just everybody's, the way everybody was growing up. But, in hindsight, I've seen that God, has allowed me to be a part of some pretty amazing things. And I think, that wasn't accidental. I think like I mentioned before, it's given me a heart for pastors and for ministry leaders and just a desire to serve them.
Do you remember, and again, you were young, but do you remember, like, were there good times and there were bad times? Was it, what were the good times and what were the bad times, I guess is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I think the good times were two things. I think first, I mentioned that school I grew up in. It was called Faith Academy, a great international school. And I think some of the great times were, traveling on sports teams, having fun cultural events where we got to explore each other's different backgrounds and families. So I think some of my best times were one in that school, and had some amazing teachers that, definitely left a significant imprint on my life.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like you mentioned, family as well. I think the second part of great memories growing up was family time. And like a lot of people in ministry or that are missionaries, my parents didn't have a lot of excess money to do fun things, but I think they leveraged the money and the income they had the best that they could and allowed us to do fun things. So we got to go, because we lived in a very tropical area, we got to go to the beach a lot, and we would go, tubing down some of the muddiest rivers. And, in hindsight, they were, extremely muddy, dirty, nasty rivers, but, it was fun. And so, we didn't go on lavish vacations, but we did, my parents took the money they had, and we were able to do some traveling. And, but I think looking back, those family memories are some of my best memories. And like you said, I think that made us a very tight family unit, even to this day. I'm 35, and my dad is still one of my absolute best friends in the world.
Are they still in the mission field?
They're not.
What do they do now?
So my dad, about 15 years ago, retired from being a missionary and took a job as a military contractor. So by trade, he's a pilot.
Oh, cool.
And he served, I believe it was 5 or 6 tours in Afghanistan, and was a high altitude surveillance pilot in Afghanistan for about 10 years. And then transitioned from that to a charter company that manages charter jets and charter airplanes, and is their chief pilot now. So he still travels a lot. We always laugh that my dad's a man of many, many trades. And
that sounds like it.
But yeah, an amazing man of God. God's given him just a lot of cool opportunities, both professionally, but then also in ministry. He's really got a heart for the lost. And when he was in Afghanistan, he ended up planting, I believe it was 3 different churches on Air Force bases in Afghanistan. And was able to lead lots and lots of young men over there to Christ. And honor my dad. And
I need to have him on the podcast.
You should. He's a man of many trades.
Well, recently I had the opportunity to go to Ecuador for a week with Compassion International, and we went to some of, when you say jungle, I mean, I've been there. And one of the places that we went that they actually took us to was, we went to Palm Beach, which is where Jim Elliott and those guys that, in the 50s were killed as missionaries. And I actually stood on the spot where they died. But one of the reasons I brought that up was because one of the lead missionaries there, and everything was about being able to fly, because you can't get to where we went to unless you can fly a plane and land on a grass strip. And so the benefit of being able to do multiple things was really helpful to them. It sounds like it was really helpful to you guys too, growing up, that your dad he wasn't just, quote unquote, just a pastor. He had to do other things too, to kind of work and connect. And
exactly.
That was kind of your experience too.
Exactly. Yeah.
So one of the things you do now is you are working at Wilcox, and you support and come along beside pastors. And if I understand right, there's 2 tracks that you basically focus on. One is helping pastors and churches do mission trips, short-term mission trips. Then the other is doing trips to Israel, or either getting to go to Israel or even leading a trip to Israel. I have never been. So at some point, Jordan's going to get me into the Holy Land. I know that's coming.
That's the first question.
Yeah,
that's the first question, Dale. When are we going to go? We got to go.
Well, I've always wanted to go, but and which we'll dive into this a little bit. I just never could afford to go, and so we'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, I want to talk a bit about. So I'm pastoring a small church somewhere because that's our audience. Let's say I'm over in Oklahoma somewhere in the rural part of Oklahoma. I've got a church of 80 people. But I'd love to take some of our people on a missions trip, a short-term mission trip somewhere in the world. We reach out to you and contact you. How does that process work? What happens there? How does that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like you said, we really have two arms of the company.
Mm-hmm.
The first arm, and we'll talk about that later, is planning trips to the Holy Land. But like you said, let's talk about missionary travel right now. So we have a team of our agents at Wilcox Travel. So I'm not a travel agent. We have a team of agents that they specialize in securing highly discounted airfare for missionaries, for either long-term or short-term missionaries, and then also for nonprofit organizations, which churches would fall under that category, and then also for humanitarian organizations as well. All kind of fall under that category of what we call missionary travel. And so because our company has been in the travel industry for so long, we've been doing this for over 50 years, we've got deep relationships with American Airlines, with Delta, with United, with Lufthansa, all these big players in the travel industry. And every year our team works really, really hard to re-up and renegotiate contracts with the airlines where we're able to secure highly discounted airfare for mission trips. And at any church, but I'm sure especially at smaller churches and in any nonprofit, I was a part of a nonprofit for almost 15 years, money's tight when you're in ministry. I mean, that's just the reality.
That's just life, man. That's just life.
If you've got money just coming out of the woodwork and coming off the trees, you're probably not in ministry or you're not doing it right. And so, especially for missionaries, money's just tight, and so that's where we can come alongside of churches and say, hey, we want to serve you by helping you secure highly discounted airfare for your missions trips. And a lot of people are, even for purchasing a ticket for one or two people, much less a team of people, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard.
I led a group to Trinidad when I was at a church here in Greenville years ago, and we took 47 people with us, and I thought I was going to lose my mind.
Yeah,
I didn't have a travel agent.
On a passport information, and instead of Dale Sellers, if we write Dale Seller on your ticket, the reality is you're not going to Ecuador.
Yeah, because it's misspelled.
All of a sudden, you just wasted $2,000-$3,000 that you raised on a mission trip, and so money is tight. Getting the details correct on travel details is super important, and that's where our team can come alongside of churches and serve and support them. But then also, as far as planning the logistics, a lot of churches say, hey, we want to go on a missions trip, but we don't even know where to start. We don't know where to go. I've got a lot of great organizations and partnerships that we work with, that if a church is looking for somewhere to go, we can help point them in the right direction for planning the actual ground part of the travel for a missions trip as well.
I just think this is important on this side of the pandemic, because I believe the pandemic brought a lot of things to a halt. I think a lot of us have done a lot of reflective things and some reactive things. And one of the things that I believe has happened is a lot of churches backed off on missions because they were trying to survive. They got instead of thriving, they got in survival mode. And, a couple of years have gone by now and they haven't done anything missions oriented. And so if I'm pastoring that church that I mentioned in Oklahoma, do I need to have a place that I want to go? And I reach out to you and say, hey, Jordan, can you guys get us there? Or can I just reach out to you and say, hey, we'd like to go on a short-term mission trip. Do you have some places you suggest? How does that work?
Yes, I would say both of those.
Okay.
Both of those are great options. So if, say, Dale, you call me up and say, hey, I want to take my church to Mexico. We've got a missionary down there from my church that we want to go serve with. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's awesome. We can help work with you and set that up and make that happen for you. The second scenario, say, Dale, you're a pastor and you want to take a group of college students, a group of young adults from your church on a missions trip. you may not even know where to start or where to go. The answer is also yes. Like, we have partnerships that we could connect you with. And based on the type of work that you're wanting to do, we would connect you with the right partnership. So if you're bringing a group of, hard working blue collar men from your church, we may partner you with a construction ministry in Guatemala City. That would be a great fit for you. But if you're taking a group of students that really have a heart for kids, we may partner you with an orphanage in India that would be a better fit. So we would tailor that type of work and the type of ministry based on the audience and the heart for the type of ministry that you're wanting to do.
Okay, two thoughts. The first one is there an average cost of what it would, just a typical mission trip? And then second, how much time do we need to allow to prepare? So if I reach out to you today, in reality, how far out should that trip be if it's from today? We're recording today in mid-September. So if I reached out to you today and said, hey, I really want to do this, how long should it be that I should think this is when it's going to happen?
Yeah, those are two great questions. So first, the cost. And cost really, really can vary based on, I think, the biggest portion
where you go and stuff.
Where you go. The airplane ticket is probably going to be 65 to 75% of your budget for the trip. Okay. And when I was at Clayton King Ministries and Crossroads worldwide, some of our less expensive trips were in the $1,200-$1,400. Trips like Haiti or to Guatemala. But then if you're doing a trip to Thailand, your airplane ticket could be well over $2,000. So you may have a $2,500 or $3,000 trip. And so, that's, Dale, where we really can help. If, 75% of your budget is your airplane ticket, if we can cut a third of that cost off,
sounds great.
We're, saving you a lot of money, and really helping that sticker price for the trip to be a lot less expensive. And what that does is that just allows more people to be able to go and allows your missions budget to go a lot further. And then the second question, I think a year is kind of a good benchmark for how long to plan a trip. We can turn a trip around pretty quick for you. But the reality is you may have middle schoolers, you may have high schoolers, you may have busy moms and dads wanting to go on a missions trip, and they're going to have to come up with that money. They may have to save for a year, or they may have to reach out to friends and family and colleagues who want to support them on that trip. And that just takes time to raise that money. And so I would say a year is a good benchmark for planning a trip.
One other question in this, and then we'll shift over to the other track that you're on. Do you help plan trips within the country?
Yes. So we do quite a bit of travel within the country. We work with small organizations, larger organizations. We work with, like last week, I was meeting with an evangelist who's a converted Iranian, and he travels here both internationally, but then also in the States as well. And he's just gotten to the point that even his domestic travel is just too much for him to handle. And it gets expensive handling it himself. And so he asked me last week, hey, can we just pass this off to you? And yes, like that's also something that we can do is, if you want to do domestic mission trips, or even if you're a bivocational pastor who, part of your time you're a pastor, but then part of the time you're, working a for-profit job, or you may run your own company. And if you need assistance with travel as well, those are all things that we can come alongside of pastors and leaders and help serve them. Good.
Now, I need you to book me a trip to Punta Cana down in Dominican Republic. I need a week of reflection. And can you book
Let's do it.
I'm just kidding. Here's what we're gonna do.
Only if I can come with you and bring my bride with me.
Okay, well, that'd be fine as long as y'all stay somewhere separate. That's cool. So let me do this. Let's take a short break, and then we're gonna come back and talk a little bit about the Israel side of this of what you do. So short break. We'll be right back.
Thanks, Dale.
Back here with Jordan Hibbard, and just having a fun time talking about Wilcox Travel, how they help churches with missions trips, whether it's inside the country, outside the country, short-term, long-term, wherever you want to go, these guys can help you. And I know for small churches, a lot of times we don't even think about doing this kind of stuff because it just seems too enormous. And so I wanted to connect you through this podcast with Jordan. The second area I want to talk about today is they do trips to the Holy Land. And Jordan, I've never been to the Holy Land. I've never even considered that I could afford to go to the Holy Land. We have some good friends who at one of our larger churches in the area, and they go all the time. But they have budget money for that. Most small church folks don't have budget money for that, and so just even the thought, as much as I think anybody would, if there were no hindrances, if there were no obstacles in the way, I think any pastor, leader, church person would love to go to see the Holy Land. But there's two things. One is just the enormous cost. And then the second thing that you alluded to as we began the podcast is I don't even know where do you start. And you guys kind of help with both of that. So walk me through again. Here we are. We're in a small church, and I'm a small church pastor. I may be bivocational, and I don't have a great deal of resources available for a trip like this. Walk me through how you can get me there.
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks for starting with that. And I think, like you mentioned, so I actually was talking with a pastor. So we have a heart for serving lots of different types of churches. I was talking with a pastor at a larger church yesterday, and he's going on a trip to Israel with another company, and wasn't excited about that. But
I could see that wasn't very a little dig there.
And I was talking with him yesterday, and I was just like, hey, I would love to hear a little bit more about how your trips are set up. And I just asked him, I was like, hey, this may be too personal of a question, but are you paying for your trip? Is the church paying for it? And he said, yeah, like the church has budget that they, send our campus pastors on a trip. Yeah. And I was like, that's amazing for you. But I think, Dale, we know the reality that's of church and ministry in America. That's not the reality at most churches where they've got money to.
I'll just be really honest with you. I almost resent it when I hear someone who's part of, and I love the church, and so, but when someone's part of a larger church that has budget money for this, and it's almost like people are guilting you and going, "Oh, you haven't been to the Holy Land?" Well, no, I don't have someone paying for it for me. If I'm just being honest, and I like to do that on this podcast, and so I've always been a little bit almost resentful toward it's almost like, "Oh, you haven't been to the Holy Land?" Well, I've been 6 times. Well, of course you have. Somebody else paid for it. Right. Yes, I would love to go, but I don't. It's just I haven't had that money. So anyway, I'm sorry. I mean, interrupt you.
That's
hit
great.
My button too.
And so, I was excited for this friend of mine who's a pastor, but also, like you said, that's not the reality for everybody. But I think I would lead with the question of, if you're a pastor and you did not have the hindrance of the roadblock of money, schedule, time, and if you didn't have to worry about all of the details of planning the logistics for a trip, would you want to go on a trip? If you didn't have to worry about the budget, and if you didn't have to worry about planning and taking care of the details for it, and like you said, I think most pastors would say yes. But you're crazy, Jordan. Like, that's not a reality for me. And I would say, no, that's a lie. That's not the truth. So what I get to do is I get to sit down with pastors and hear their hearts. Some pastors would say, and I actually sat down with the pastor in Charlotte last week, and he said, I have no idea even where I would want to visit. I don't even know where the options are. And, so what we can do is I can bring, we bring kind of some sample or some ideas of what a trip could look like to a pastor, and let them just start reading over it, exploring it. And, so often their eyes just come alive, and they're like, you mean I have the opportunity to go to Galilee, where Jesus walked and did his ministry? I have the opportunity to ride on a boat across the Sea of Galilee. I have the opportunity to walk the streets of Jerusalem, where Jesus, literally the same streets, walked and, climbed the same temple steps. And I would say, yes, so that's kind of the first step, is we look at some sample itineraries and start dreaming. Some pastors may say, hey, I don't see Nazareth on this itinerary. I've always wanted to. I've got a special heart for some things that Jesus did in Nazareth. So we can customize those trips for pastors. And then what we start doing is we start looking at dates and budgets. And one important question is, how long do I even need to plan a trip? And I would say, probably a year to a year and a half is kind of the minimum. A lot of pastors will tell me, hey, I'm busy. I don't think I could go for, a year and a half, maybe 2.5 years from now, just because our church schedule is so busy. And I would say that's definitely not too early to start planning a trip, even 2.5 years out. Mm-hmm. There's so much competition, and to get with the best guides, and to get into sites and get into some good hotels. And so planning, a year to 2.5 years out is not too early. But then I think, Dale, we come to the big question, which is the dollar signs. A lot of pastors say that all sounds great, Jordan, but like, I don't have $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 laying around in my budget. And so what we do is we build into the trip cost of each person that goes on the trip a small portion of that trip cost that would help offset the pastor or the ministry leader's trip cost. So it may be $50, $100, or $150 extra dollars that we build into that trip cost that then helps offset the pastor or the ministry leader's trip. And then we also have resources and budgets here at Wilcox that, sometimes we're able to help kick in to cover that cost as well. But I would tell most pastors, if they're, able to even invite 5 or 10 people that would be interested in going on a trip to the Holy Land with them, then very realistically, we should be able to create a trip for them that they wouldn't have to pay to go. And then a lot of times they may want to take another staff member with them or their wife, go on the trip with them as well. And if that's something, we can also build that into the trip cost where, it doesn't inflate that price of the trip. It may only be, a very small, 5% of the trip increase, but it covers that cost so that the pastor doesn't have to worry or carry that burden for coming up with that money to go on the trip.
That's really cool. One of the things that there's a misnomer out there that small churches are broke, and though the church budget might be broke, there's always people in just about every church who have great means. I've been doing this a long time, and I can tell you that's the case. And so what I hear you saying is so if I'm pastoring a small church somewhere, if I could plan a trip, and then let's just say 5 couples in the church want to go on this trip, that you can actually help offset my costs because I'm kind of like the promoter, if you will, or the connecting point to make that happen. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I think if you, like you said, if you've got 5 or 10 couples that want to go on a trip, what we would do is build a small percentage of the trip cost for them into that trip cost that would cover the pastor and his wife so that they could go as well. And on most trips, there's really kind of a 3-tier leadership structure on a trip. So you would have 3 people on the trip that are in charge of the trip. Okay. And so first off, you would have someone that sits in my seat from Wilcox Travel that we would be, we'll call them the logistics coordinator, where we would be the one that's making sure airfare is running smoothly, making sure that, when you go to check into a hotel, that all of the reservations and keys are correct. If for some reason the bus doesn't show up one morning, the tour pastor, whoever's listening to this podcast, you're not the one that's going to have to say, oh no, what do I do? Who do I call to make sure the bus is here? We take care of all of that for the pastor. So that's the first person, is the tour coordinator. Okay. And they would be someone from my team here in the States that would travel with the pastor. Second person on the team is your tour guides. They would be an Israeli Christian guide. That's what they do for a living. They would be on the trip with you, and they're the expert when it comes to the lay of the land, navigating sites, explaining the history, connecting the Bible to the site. They're the one that's the expert on that. And a lot of pastors say, I've read about, this side or this side in the Holy Land, but
I'll give you a good example is the gates of hell. Yes. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Well, unless you know what that literally means, and Clayton's talked about that, about there is an actual place.
That's actually his favorite site to visit in Israel.
He talks about it, and he just paints a picture of it when he talks about it, And so, if you haven't been there, you don't really understand the point of that passage. Or I guess you can do deep study and understand it, but there's nothing like being there is what I understand.
Yeah, but a lot of pastors, say this like, "Hey, I don't have the free time in my schedule. I've only got 1 or 2, maybe 4 people on my staff. I'm busy running church. I don't have 8 months to go study, 60% of my workday to plan for a trip on the studying part." And, so I've had pastors say, I could never lead a trip because of that either. And I would say, no, like that's the tour guide's job, is they know.
You don't have to lead it, pastor. You just get to enjoy it.
Exactly. And so then the third piece of the leadership structure on the trip would be the person listening to this podcast. And I like to use the term tour pastor. Their job is to invite and recruit some people from their church who would want to come experience the Holy Land with him. But then on the trip, their responsibility is to pastor and shepherd the people that are on the trip with them.
Okay.
And they're the expert at that. There's nobody that's going to know their congregation and their people on the trip better than them, because that's their job. And they, spend day in and day out every week pastoring and shepherding their people. And so how that plays out can look a variety of different ways. And the pastor would have the flexibility of how they want to pastor and shepherd their people. So one example, they may say, hey, I'd love to do, a short devotional once a day. We'll pick one site that's got a good area that the whole group can sit down, and, I'll share a devotional at that site, and, kind of do a teaching pastoral time at that site. Some pastors may say, hey, I want to give a 2 or 3 minute dialogue or a little bit of a talk at each site. And that's fine as well. Some pastors like to all day long soak it in and just experience the trip with their people. And then at the end of the day, what we can do is we can get a ballroom or, some sort of a room in the hotel, pull everybody together, and the pastor can lead a time of dialogue, Q&A, and really just help the people on the trip process through what they've been learning and seeing, and processing through how is this practical to my life back in Greenville, South Carolina. So those really are the three people. Our goal is to take those logistics off of the pastor so that he can soak up the trip, enjoy it, so that it can be a once in a lifetime trip for him, and then allow him really to pour into and pastor his people.
That's cool. Logistically, when you say that you put a little bit of money in each person's their cost to help offset my cost if I'm the pastor, do they know that? Do the people know that?
Yeah. So we would.
So they actually know that. I just feel like that might be important.
Yeah, and I think that's something the pastor would want to, potentially explain. And based on the size of the trip, based on the number of people that are wanting to go on the trip, that number can look very, very different.
Sure.
So, I don't want to give a blanket statement of, it's always 5% or 10% of the trip cost, because it can look very different based on the needs that the pastor has. But I think that's something very important that the pastor, may want to communicate to his people.
I just feel like it could be really tense if you know that the people you're leading on the trip know that they paid, they paid your way, but they don't know it. And so that's why I wanted to ask that question. And so basically you're saying they do know that.
Yeah. I would say too, Dale, I would encourage pastors. I think there's a lot of people, like you said, there are people in small churches that do have resources that want to love on and invest back in their pastor. And I've seen a lot of churches say, I want to go on a trip, but hey, I've got, one of my elders, one of my deacons that's a cornerstone businessman in the community, and he's offered to pay for the cost or a portion of the cost of my trip, as well as the cost of his trip, and so that's another option. Is there's often people in the church that I've seen that are willing to help cover the cost of the pastor's trip as well.
Okay. Another last question I want to ask on that or in that line is, going to Israel safe?
Yes, it's very safe.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, they bomb each other all the time over there.
Yes. And so it's funny. That's probably the most common question I get from pastors.
Really? Okay, good.
I would say, yes, it's very safe. And the reason is, it's not because there's a potential for conflict. There's tons of potential for conflict. All kinds of Muslim, nations that have been fighting Israel for thousands and thousands of years.
Yep.
But the reason is that it is safe is that Israel takes security extremely, extremely, extremely seriously. When you go through the airport, they're going to take security very, very seriously. When you see, when you're traveling, you're going to see security in the streets of Jerusalem. You're going to see security at each of the different sites that we visit on our trips, and that they take security very, very seriously. And one, because this is their homeland, this is their country, they're protecting it, and I think Israel has one of the strongest militaries because they've had to fight so hard for thousands and thousands of years to protect their country. But then the flip side also is that tourism is a significant portion of the economy for Israel. And so if Israel is not safe, all of a sudden, a lot of our Western tourists from America, from Canada, from all over the world that are Christians that want to come visit the Holy Land, all of a sudden that portion of their economy dries up. And that's a big problem for the Israeli economy. And so because of that, they take tourism, or they take security extremely, extremely seriously. And yes, so it's a very safe place to visit. We have staff members on our team at Wilcox that are in constant communication with our partners on the ground in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem, and are in almost daily communication with them, monitoring safety, monitoring security, so that we don't end up sending a team into a situation that's not going to be safe.
Is there a better time of the year than not to go?
Yes, absolutely.
So when is this?
So summertime, as you can imagine, is extremely hot in Israel. And so
Is there weather like America, like ours in this?
Very similar weather to here in America, especially, here in the southeastern United States where you and I live. Summertime is extremely hot. Wintertime is often pretty cold and often really rainy in the wintertime as well. And so summer and winter are not great times to visit. Springtime or fall are more of temperate climates, similar to how it would be here in North or South Carolina, where you may have a little bit of cool in the mornings, but then it gets up into the 80s in the afternoon. And so that's really when we encourage pastors and groups to visit Israel, is in either the spring or the fall. Because Israel is such a beautiful country. I mean, there's a reason it's beautiful, because it's God's holy land. God picked that piece of land for his people. That was the promised land. And so it's beautiful, and you want to be able to soak it up and fully experience it by being outside. And so that's why we encourage the fall or spring when the weather is more temperate.
I'm assuming Easter's a bad time to go, and Christmas, because of the crowds.
Easter and Christmas are extremely busy and extremely expensive. We would strongly discourage churches from going around Easter. Although even less than a week after Easter, prices drop significantly. We were actually working on a tour yesterday with a church here in Anderson, and they're wanting to go right after Easter. Because for a lot of churches, it's the Super Bowl. It's one of the biggest days of the year, and so the pastor was explaining to me that we're going to work all spring, getting ready for Easter, preparing my message for Easter. And then after Easter, before the weather gets too hot, is when he's wanting to go to Israel. And that's a perfect time to go.
How long's a typical trip?
That's another great question. So we can do trips really as short or as long as churches want to do. We typically recommend either a 10-day tour or a 12-day tour. And typically you would have, depending on where you're traveling from, a day on either end of that 10 or 12-day tour. That would be for international travel. So on a 10-day tour, you would have about 7 or 8 days actually in the country on the ground in Israel. But 10 or 12 is a good starting point.
Do you guys give us a chance to catch our breath at the end before we come back, or is it just nonstop and then boom, you're back on the plane home?
That's up to the pastor, but as a recommendation, I think the tendency is when you're planning a trip is to just jam pack it full of go, 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 go. And that's important because you want to maximize your time in the country. A lot of people won't get the opportunity to go multiple times to Israel. They may get one opportunity in their life. And so you do want to maximize your time, but you also don't want to jam pack your schedule so full that you don't get to fully absorb your time there. And then, like you said, typically the last day, what we often recommend is kind of a little bit of a slower afternoon. And then we do call it like a farewell dinner, that we plan a little bit of an extra special dinner for the pastor and his people, where we'll do a special dinner at a nice hotel and do a little bit of an extended dinner where they can catch their breath, share stories, have some Q&A time, some share time, and just kind of process the end of the trip, catch their breath before either that night late or the next morning catching a flight home to the United States.
Okay. This question is totally opposite of anything we've talked about all day as far as the particular group of people we're trying to help. If I had unlimited resources and I could go to Israel and see the sites that you guys could connect me to, how long would it take if I could just go and get there and not leave till I've covered it all? How much time would that take?
Years. Years and years. No, there are so many sites. I mean, you really could make trip after trip and continue to see new sites. But if you wanted to do an extended trip, a lot of or not a lot, but I've seen, multiple times pastors do more of like a sabbatical trip where them and their wife may do a little bit of an extended trip, and if you were able to do even like a 14-day trip, take 2 weeks, we've even got some tours that start down in Egypt. You transition from Egypt into Jordan, where you can see, a lot more of the sites from the Old Testament, and then transition to the second half of the trip and see Israel as well. 14 days, you could see a lot. 14 days, and really get to see, probably 3/4 of the significant sites from Old into the New Testament.
The reason I asked that is because it's as you think about, okay, I'm limited, I can only see this or that. I just wanted folks to kind of know the scope of what's possible, if they were to make that trip. So, Pastor, go ahead.
The crazy thing is too, they're continuing to find new sites in the Holy Land almost every month. They're continuing to unveil, and there's parts of the city of David in Jerusalem that, on my last trip 3-4 years ago when I was there, they hadn't uncovered and hadn't dug up yet. And so they're still uncovering lots and lots of new sites. And so that list continues to grow and expand. Another fun opportunity, I actually was working with a pastor from the Nashville area this week, and we just finished his tour, but he wanted to do what's called a sifting project. So what they'll do is they'll go into the city of David, where they're still digging and doing a lot of archaeological uncovering still. And their group is actually going to get to spend half of a day on an archaeological dig site where they're going to slow down to get their hands dirty and uncover, parts of Jerusalem that no one has ever seen before, which is a pretty cool opportunity.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. So here you are, Pastor. We've talked about how you can afford to go. I've got you a connection who can help guide the trip. We've got some people here who can help you once you get there. And the biggest thing I wanted to do from this podcast was to let you know, hey, it's possible that you can go to the Holy Land if you'd love to. I also want you to know that if you're leading a small church, it's possible to do a missions trip. And that's why I wanted Jordan on to connect you. And so what I'll do is I'll have all his contact information available in the show notes to reach out to Jordan, and just don't take no as an answer when you really feel like this is something that the Lord's calling you to do. But it takes planning and preparing. You have to prepare yourself and plan, and just, it's so much better to do it this way than to try to do it off the cuff or just, halfway. These guys are very reputable. Check out Wilcox Travel. They've been around for as long as I've been alive, or almost as long as I've been alive. But they're very, very reputable. So today, Jordan, as we wrap up the podcast, you're sitting down, you're having dinner or coffee with one of our pastors, and they're talking about, you can see in their heart how much they want to go. And they've just always believed it's impossible. They could never afford to go. What would you say to them?
I would say, don't believe that lie. Like all of us, our heart at Wilcox Travel is, we really have a heart for everybody to have the opportunity to visit the Holy Land. And I think as Christians, it's such an important opportunity for Christians to get to see and walk and experience the places that they read about every day in their Bibles. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is don't believe that lie, that even if you have been told or have had that lie in your head that I would never be able to go, I would never be able to afford a trip, I would say tell that lie to shut up. And, we're going to have my contact information in the show notes. And I'd love to just jump on the phone call if you're a pastor, a ministry leader, and, learn more about your church, learn, about your heart for missions, hear your heart for going to Israel. And I'd love to just dream and brainstorm with how we could make a trip happen for you.
Well, folks, there you heard it. You have no excuses now. Don't believe the lie. You have
the
opportunity to go. Jordan, thank you for taking the time to join me today. I do hope folks will reach out to you. And as we both have mentioned, all the contact information to connect with Jordan will be in the show notes. Thank you again for joining me today.
Thank you so much. This has been an honor and a ton of fun to hang out and dream a little bit about what a trip could look like for you.
It has been fun for me too.
Thanks for listening to the 95 Podcast. We look forward to sharing another episode with you next week. In the meantime, visit our website at 95network.org. The website is loaded with great resources created for small and mid-sized church leaders. Until next time, have a great week.